Okay, I'm going to make this very brief. I'm not going to allow voting on it. I will allow comments, but the reason I'm doing this, and I'm using, if you've done a lot of logic, you'll recognize this immediately probably. It's Gödel's proof of God. It's a form of an ontological argument. And I'm using it to illustrate the fact that you can, with logic, say a lot of things that are in the real world not true, and are, you know, forms of nonsense, basically. It's done with propaganda quite a bit. And one way it's done is through equivalence statements. Now, the Caruth has said that my analysis of grappling ignorance was wrong because grappling ignorance was only presenting an equivalence statement. Equivalence statements are this kind of statements that are metalogic. They basically are logical in nature only. They are not to be analyzed semantically. And they're easily confused, as I tried to point out in some comments I made to grappling ignorance. They're easily confused with their use, equivalent statements, in programming and also in mathematics. But in logic, if you use an equivalence statement, you have to be very careful, especially when you're using it in the form of an analogy. It does not somehow exempt you from semantic analysis. In other words, if you're comparing an apple to an orange and you're saying, I'm doing it as a construct of the logic, I'm making a meta-linguistic argument, it would be called in logic, in symbolic logic especially, that doesn't exempt you from having some relationship between the two elements of your analogy. So that if you compare one thing to another, you do have to, or you have to answer questions about why you chose that as the focus of your analogy. You do have logical obligations to say that there is some relation between the two if you're not going to just fall into propaganda. So saying that something is an equivalence statement in logic, fine, that's fine. If you're presenting just a logical proof and it's confined to the forms of logical proofs, and it's not in itself a semantic argument, then I think equivalence statements can just be treated as equivalence statements. But when you fall into the realm of making your arguments in semantics and using language, you do have to be able to defend why you use the elements of comparison that you did. For example, if you do the comparison that grappling ignorance did, he said basically, vegetarians, if they took the same tactics that fundamentalist Christians took, he would retaliate against them. I mean, there are all sorts of flaws in that argument from a semantic point of view. It's not that he just pulled these two examples out of the air. I mean, I could say I'm going to compare orangutans to battleships, but you know, somebody could say, or I'm going to use two in an example of an analogy, but it's a valid question to say, well, why did you choose orangutans and why did you choose battleships? I mean, you can't just say there is no relationship and that you pull these two out of nowhere, because there is an implicit semantic relationship, even if you deny it. Because, I mean, it's patently clear to me, and to say that there was no relationship because of some sort of hocus pocus of symbolic logic is absurd. And it's not that I'm emotionally involved in this. I probably wouldn't have done it if I weren't a vegetarian. I wouldn't have gone into the intricacies of the argument and why there are flaws in it. But I would have seen them and just passed on. The reason I did it is because I do have a self-interest. I choose not to eat meat. And I don't want the implicit analogy out there that somehow making that dietary choice is analogous in any way, which it isn't, to fundamentalist religion. It might not be something that grappling ignorance intended, and I certainly accept that. But the form of the argument that he made was a semantic argument. It was not a purely meta-linguistic logical argument. And to say, therefore, equivalent statements have no semantic value, I think, is begging the question in the extreme. So, anyway, I'm not going to allow voting on this. I'm not going to allow, I mean, if you want to discuss it in the comment section, if you still think I'm wrong about this, at least limit it to the logical reasons that I'm wrong. And don't make it just that I'm emoting or that I'm a vegetarian emoting, because I'm not. And I'm tired of hearing it. Thanks.